Anyone telling you that they know how this is going to play out in 13 days is not giving it to you straight. Yeah, you can look at trends, early voting numbers, see where the turnout is, and all that is well and good, and that should be done. And as you heard Donald Trump say there at the top of the hour news, he is voting early. And I will be doing that this week. I know many of you are doing it, have done it. The numbers suggest that the early voting on both sides of our state line are blowing it out. The first couple of days, Kansas starting on Saturday, Missouri starting yesterday. The lines have been very long, so people are realizing, hey, just bank that vote. Especially Republicans are wising up to how the game is played. Bank that vote, get it in, and move on. But no one actually knows what's going to happen. The polling numbers obviously show Donald Trump in a good spot. There's now some questions as to whether or not maybe the pollsters have overcorrected to try to find that Trump voter. I don't know. I don't. You don't. We don't. It's going to be pretty close. As Rich Lowry said last hour, the editor of the National Review, we may still have to wait a couple of days to figure out who wins this election. But if Donald Trump does win this election, and if he wins it because of minority voters, I've been thinking to myself, what are his political opponents going to use if Donald Trump wins this race because of minority voters? You are seeing huge swings, especially with Latino voters, towards Donald Trump. Hillary won him by 30 plus, 40 points 8 years ago. Biden won Latino voters by 20. Trump, some polling shows him neck and neck. Maybe it's not that, but if he's down to a 5-point deficit with Latino voters, that's enormous. And then also you look at black voters and black males in particular. Polling suggests maybe leaning towards Donald Trump, especially younger black males, which would also be unprecedented. So you go back to 2020, CBS News reported that Joe Biden beat Donald Trump among black voters 90-9. That's men and women. This year, polling has Kamala Harris up 78-15. That's overall around the country. However, in the 7 most competitive swing states, about 1 in 4 black men say they definitely or probably will vote for Donald Trump, according to the Wall Street Journal. So what happens then? Because when Donald Trump won 8 years ago, what did you hear? The hoods are off. Donald Trump brought out the racists. Oh, boy, it's still alive and well in America. They had 8 years of the black man in office, and they swung the pendulum back to Donald Trump, who's just an open racist. Well, what if Donald Trump wins this time around because he improves his share of minority voters, which it looks like is all but certain to happen? I still believe that they're going to use that line because many of the viewers of these cable news programs don't actually care about like what the data shows in the polling. They're just going to find the narrative that they conveniently want to fit into. But it won't be based in fact. No matter what, it won't be based in fact. Donald Trump might lose this election, but it seems almost guaranteed that he is going to improve his standing with Latino voters and improve his standing with black voters, and most notably in that subset, Latino men and black men. So how are they going to frame this if Donald Trump wins, and he wins in large part because he grew his share of minority voters? What do they then do? How do they spin this thing? I don't know, and I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but it is a fascinating conundrum that they are going to find themselves in potentially in a couple of weeks. And that leads me to this article that was written by Jason Riley in the Wall Street Journal. Headlined, "Why Are Democrats Losing Black Voters?" Because it's amazing to see that the shift here is happening where you've got more minority working class voters looking at the Republicans. And really what you have is college-educated woke whites moving more towards the Democrats, which is fascinating because they're doing it and they're virtue signaling by being like, we're here to help the little guy. We're doing fine here in, Northeast Johnson County, but we want to vote for the candidate that's going to help the working minority who's trying to get ahead. And meantime, you've got many working minorities who are like, yeah, the Democrat Party's not really doing it for us anymore. So Jason Riley, who happens to be black, I think that's important to note for the article. He says here that he talked to different people, and one person he spoke with is Robert Woodson, who describes himself as a radical pragmatist. Spent the last 50 years of his life working among and walking among and learning from some of the most resilient people you can imagine. He's been coordinating development programs in poor black neighborhoods since the 1960s. And he talked to Mr. Woodson about his take on why Kamala Harris hasn't matched the level of support among black voters that other Democratic presidential candidates have received. And Mr. Woodson mused that the track record of Democrats might finally be catching up with them. He said, quote, Democrats have been running these big cities for 60 years, and black people see the results. Nor does he believe the problem is unique to Ms. Harris. If Mr. Biden hadn't dropped out of the race, quote, he'd be having similar problems with black voters because they remember the unemployment and low inflation under Donald Trump. Now, here are the numbers that need to be most noted in this conversation. Before the COVID-19 pandemic shut down the economy, inflation-adjusted weekly earnings under Donald Trump grew 12.5% for all black workers, according to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics. The numbers for white workers during that same period of time, 7.9%. So pre-COVID, black workers were making absolute gains and gaining on their white counterparts. Not that they were making the same, but the gains were nearly double for black workers than they were for white workers pre-COVID. Under the Biden-Harris administration, inflation-adjusted earnings to date are up less than 1% with blacks and down 1.5% among whites. That's indisputable. That is data right there that you look at and you say to yourself, the numbers don't lie. So I'm not sitting here predicting Donald Trump's going to win black voters or Hispanic voters. But there's something to be said when you look at these numbers and you say to yourself, okay, well, people are feeling a certain way. And you can talk about the stock market all you want. And yes, the stock market's done very well. But the stock market's not happening when it comes to what's going on Main Street. Those are two different economies. And you look at the plans that the Harris campaign has rolled out, and there's nothing there that's really connecting with the working class voter. There are no plans there, as they would say. Jonathan's in Kansas City. Go ahead, Jonathan. You're on KCMO.
How you doing, Pete? So I actually, one of the judges who work the early voting, I work at, they have 6 voting sites in Kansas City within Jackson County, in the Kansas City Election Board, and I work at the one at United Believers. We had about 80 people ready to check in when we opened at 10 a.m. yesterday, about 80 people. And the lines were pretty much throughout the day. They got up to about, I'd say they were swelling up to about an hour or two long lines. And yeah, you saw all kinds of people turning out, young, old, I mean, just all types of people. So, I don't know what that means. What I was thinking is, well, maybe it's, these are people who would have voted on Election Day. Mm-hmm. So, maybe we'll have less turnout on Election Day. Maybe that's part of it. I've heard other people say the same thing, don't count your chickens before they hatch.
Yep.
I also wonder, how many of them are newer voters? I don't, first time or low propensity voters. I'm not sure. I just know that's big turnout, because some people were saying, oh, there's not going to be the turnout. All I can say is what I'm experiencing, and I don't know, maybe today will be better because that was the first day of no excuse early voting, but, we'll see. Maybe I wouldn't be too surprised if, that keeps throughout, which I don't know, maybe then if you actually do show up on Election Day, which I think voting early is still the best thing. But if you were to do that, maybe it's going to be less people because so many voted early.
Yeah. And who knows, Jonathan, thank you. Who knows who those voters are, like you said. Are they low propensity? Are they first-time voters? Are they people who have not traditionally voted in prior elections? No one really knows. That's why no one can predict what exactly is happening right now and how it's going to play out in less than 2 weeks. But we do know that these things are shifting. The parties are shifting. The demographics of the parties are also shifting. And that is going to be part of the postmortem that, of course, we'll be looking at here on KCMO Talk Radio coming up in a couple of weeks. But the trend lines, you would rather be Trump when it comes to the trend lines right now than you would be Kamala Harris.